Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so grateful to be joining you all for the third day of this summit, which is focused on really an incredible and timely topic, as I shared yesterday in my remarks. So this afternoon, I'm pleased to be joined by Ylli Bajraktari for a conversation that will be exciting. I was supposed to read out the introduction, that was in my script, but you have done that already. But I would like to just add one more point that, originally joining the Department of Defense in 2010, he served in the office of the Undersecretary for Policy as a country director for Afghanistan and later India. And Mr. Bajraktari is the recipient of the Department of Defense Distinguished Civilian Service Medal, which is the highest award given to career DoD civilian employees. So that is a big deal. So Ylli, thank you very much for joining us today. To get things started, can you talk about the work of the National Security Commission on AI and the recommendations from that body?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohapatra. And I want to thank you, the National Security Institute and the University of South Florida for having me today. Thank you for that kind introduction. So my journey into the artificial intelligence started in 2018. As you noted, the United States Congress in 2018, under the John McCain National Defense Authorization Act, created the commission I worked for, which was named National Security Commission on AI. It was rightly called national security because I think Congress in 2018 and 19 was worried about two factors. Number one is everything they were hearing from our partners in the private sector, especially Silicon Valley, was that there's a powerful technology coming our way, artificial intelligence, that now most of us are familiar with, or at least we have tried one way or another at home, one of these large language models. And then the second factor that I think drew Congress to create the commission was the efforts, the resources, and the strategy that the Chinese Communist Party put behind this particular technology at that time in our histories. Just as a quick reflection, in 2017 and 18 and 19, Chinese Communist Party publicly stated their goals to become the world AI leader by 2030. They put enormous resources, they had a clear strategy, and they knew this is going to be a transformative, once-in-a-generation technology to really move their society, their economy, and ultimately their military to a much better place, perhaps even surpassing our military might. And so Congress, with those words in mind, created the commission that I served with and for. I was fortunate to work for 15 distinguished individuals, some of the most famous American CEOs, former public servants, and leaders in the academic world who had one task in mind. They had to go and look at what our national security agencies are doing with AI, what are the impediments to do more, and what are those changes needed in terms of legislation or executive order. So in March of 2021, we submitted a massive report to Congress, 759 pages. Out of that report so far, we have perhaps maybe more than 50 pieces of legislation that our Congress passed, to include one of the most noticeable, the CHIPS Act. But I think when I look in hindsight, why that report was successful is that traditionally our government, especially the White House or Department of Defense or the intelligence community, we produce these strategy documents, whether it's the national security strategy, whether it's the national defense strategy or the national intelligence strategy. Those documents in the current era miss a really big piece, and that is the technology piece. If you look at the national security strategy, they talk about the economic prosperity, the military dominance, the societal benefits, education. But these documents lag a critical piece that is fundamentally changing today and setting the stone for the future, and that is technology. And that's why I think the National Security Commission's work on AI was so fundamentally important, because we walked into an empty space. We walked into a largely bipartisan space, because when it comes to the issues of tech competition in China, there is still an enormous bipartisan consensus in our Congress on the things we have to do to stay ahead.
Thank you, Ylli. You mentioned about the activities in Silicon Valley. So I moved from Silicon Valley just 1 year back here to Tampa, and I know over there right now, people don't breathe the air, they breathe the AI. So it is very active area of focus in the Silicon Valley area. Can you talk a little bit more about what led to the founding of the Special Competitive Studies project and dive into critical technology window, quote unquote, that we are currently in?
Yeah, Dr. Mohapatra. So at the end of the commission's work, there was a general sense among us and among our commissioners that this is only the beginning. So when you look back in 2021, this is the pre-release of ChatGPT and the subsequent models released by the tech companies. So there was a wide recognition, and for myself, to be honest with you, having spent most of my career working inside the government, what I was observing back then in 2020 and 21 is, the innovation is really moving or happening in private sector. When you look back historically, during the Cold War especially, innovation happened inside inside the government labs. These were the investments made by our Congress through our departments and agencies to come up with, the GPS systems, the navigation, the internet, everything that has happened during the Cold War happened inside the government labs. When I worked on the AI Commission, I observed that some of these transformative technologies are now being built in private sector. And the implications of these technologies will be felt for years, maybe even for decades, on how they're going to transform everything around us. And I think since the release of ChatGPT, you can see how big of a transformation that has happened only on the discussion, the discourse of these models, let alone on the opportunities and challenges of these models. And so when we got to the end of the commission, our founder, Dr. Eric Schmidt, was writing a book with Dr. Kissinger called The Age of AI. And Dr. Kissinger talked to Eric about this initiative he led in the 50s called Special Studies Project, which was basically an effort by private citizens, academics, leaders in public sphere at that time to frame the competition we had at that time against Soviet Union. We probably didn't call it a competition, but we call it a serious how to counter Soviet Union ideology and their military efforts. And so in the 50s, Dr. Kissinger led this effort called Special Studies Project that brought together the best and the brightest we had in our nation. And they produced a book that I was not familiar with called Prospect for America. That became a bestseller in the 50s, 400,000 copies sold. That when you read it from today's perspective, it really provided that guiding principle of how we got ourselves organized, how we build our economy, our educational system, our society, and ultimately how we build the military forces to counter the Soviet Union system of values and dominance around the world. And so Dr. Kissinger spoke about that project because he thought we are at a serious critical period today as well. We have these transformative technologies being built while we at the same time are competing against a near-peer competitor who also understands the importance of these technologies and then is investing enormous resources to get the lead in these technologies. So with encouragement from Dr. Kissinger and with Eric's support and guidance, we launched Special Competitive Studies Project. We added competition in our title because according to Bob Work, who is my old mentor and boss, he said in competition, you either win or lose. And you have to add competition in your title. So that's why we're called Special Competitive Studies Project. We believe that the critical window in this century probably is the 2025, 2030 timeframe. This is where we see convergence of two, currents. Number one is the impact of these technologies. We saw the first wave of AI, but there are other waves happening at the same time. You have the biotech, you have the quantum, you have all the set of new technologies that are really coming online, maturing at the same time. And on the other hand, you have the geopolitical change of landscape where you have, as we call it, the axis of disruptors, China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, really creating a new system of values, new trade bloc, I would say, and also expanding their military ties to counter our system of values, our sphere of influence, and etc. So in our mind, 2025, 2030 is a critical period. As the National Security Strategy calls it, a decisive decade, where I think both these currents are coming to path where we have to be better organized. We have to have a clear vision of what winning looks like in this decade, because I think how we position ourselves by the end of this decade will set the course for the rest of this century, for us, for our allies and partners, and probably for the rest of the world.
Thank you. That's pretty interesting, and thank you so much, Ylli, for that. I want to bring the context of the local audience over here. What role do we as educational institutions, and we have friends from private industry over here, so what role do we should be playing in exploring this critical window that you just talked about?
So, Dr. Mohapatra, we have talked at length in our publications about this, because when you look historically, after World War II, America built a triangle of innovation. That triangle of innovation made sure that most of the innovations coming out of our country came from three different sectors: public sector, private sector, and academia. That ensured that dynamic, that interaction created the ecosystem for America to dominate the Cold War in innovation, both in civilian and military. I think that innovation triangle has been skewed after the Cold War. Most of the innovation moved to private sector. We have demand in talent for the academia. We have to solve the people issue in terms of how we keep the smartest immigrants in this country. Most of these universities attract talent from around the world. Universities in the United States still remain the world magnet for talent. The challenge we have right now is we have to fix the pathway for how do we keep these talented individuals. Because I think that is our competitive advantage over China. As many people smarter than me have said, nobody wants to go and live and work in China. But here people are coming, they're studying, they want to make their living here, they want to ultimately contribute to the society. And those that want to contribute to national security should be welcome to do that. I'm an immigrant myself, so I'm biased when it comes to this. This is the best country in the world still for immigrants, despite the current political discourse. So my point is, how do we rebalance the triangle of innovation? How do we make sure that academia is set to win in this competition? And winning means, do you guys have the necessary resources? Do you have the necessary hardware? Because building these large language models requires a lot of powerful semiconductors that are really expensive. Most of the private sector companies have access to this. Not most, but I would say probably few of them have access, and then others have, but the academia still needs access to these resources so they can, invest in basic R&D, invest in application, invest in building the next generation of innovation in campuses, and then private sector can scale this. That's what private sector is really good at. And for those that have dual purposes, that's when government has to step in, fund it, buy it, and use it for the national security purposes.
So you brought up this issue of competition, and that kind of takes me into the next question, and that is also a focus of this summit, where we are talking about the role of competition in the AI era. So can you kind of expand the scope beyond academia also? Can you discuss about the challenges and opportunities related to AI in terms of the strategic competition?
No, that's a great question, Dr. Mohapatra. So, as I said, the work I did with the Commission really opened my eyes in terms of how much China was investing in terms of AI. Now, it's really difficult to make apples to apples comparison where China is and where are we. And I think the last competition that is happening in large language models indicate that our companies, our talent, and the expertise still resides in America. But let's not forget that China is a big country. It has access to enormous pool of talent. Their universities still produce some of the best engineers in the world. China has enormous resources, and they're not shy to putting these resources to catching up. And they have amazing companies. Needless to say, what we have seen in the last 2-3 years is a massive, I would say, proliferation of Chinese applications, be it in social media, in terms of TikTok, e-finance, online retailing. These are serious platforms. And I think China is not shy to invest in their domestic capabilities, to deploy them globally. one of the things we have highlighted in our mid-decade challenges report that we published in 2021 was that we can easily wake up between 2025 and 2030 in a world in which the entire digital life and the entire digital infrastructure is controlled by Chinese companies. Think about it, like we closed our eyes in front of the 5G deployment. And all of a sudden, when you look at the world map, it's mostly 5G built by Huawei and deployed by Chinese infrastructure companies. That's one piece of this. So how we build the future of digital infrastructure, what kind of apps, where does those apps reside, and where that data flows is what is going to build the future of the economy, and ultimately how we move, how we operate, and how our military, moves around the world. And so AI becomes a critical component of that because AI is a software that is built on a lot of data with really powerful hardware. So you need to control all these three elements of AI to stay ahead in this competition. Luckily, we're still leading in software because America still is really the cutting edge of building the latest software. In data, I think these large language models have proven that we can build these models. Although China has access to more data because of the size of the population and unimpeded access to that data. And the third piece is hardware. When you look at the key companies producing these hardware needed for the large language models, they are still US-based companies.
Thank you. So at this time also, I would give an opportunity to the audience if you have a quick questions that you want to ask, or I have some questions, or I can get on to my last question. Anyone has a quick question? So the question is that we have been talking and focusing primarily on China. Are there other centers of gravity that we should be worried about?
In terms of AI, emerging tech?
In terms of AI.
Well, I mean, look, if you look at what has happened since the release of ChatGPT I think we're entering now a new phase in which you will have an emergence of new players, new actors in this space. I think UAE and the release of their Falcon models is a great example that even small countries, albeit with a lot of resources, can become a serious player in this space. So that's one example I would note is that the countries that are seeing the opportunities in shifting their, I would say, national power are going to see enormous opportunities with AI. And so you'll have countries that will invest in hardware, they will buy software, and maybe they have talent. But I think I think this next era is going to be an era in which you will have an emergence of new actors, both state and non-state. Open source models, for example, they're providing an enormous opportunity for a lot of people that don't have access to proprietary models to build on top of open source models new forms of large language models. So I think the next 3 years, the way we describe it here at SCSP is we're going to live in this co-piloting phase. We will do a lot of these things with the help of these models. And I think there will be issues that will impact workforce and labor. But in the next 3 to 5 years, once we get to better and sophisticated model, we will enter a new phase in which these models will do much, much better than we're currently seeing.
Thanks, Ylli. So we have another question from audience. With AI, do we risk a new military-industrial complex with governing abilities?
That's a great question. Now, it's hard for me to envision a military-industrial complex because I think AI is being developed by, primarily by the tech companies. I think we have to realize that we are in a competition with a country that has different values, different political system, and has serious ambitions when it comes to Taiwan, Indo-Pacific, and the world. Let's not forget, China has a policy, a strategy called Made in China 2025 that is called also a dual circular strategy, which means they want to cut off independence from the rest of the world in how they build stuff domestically, and they don't want to rely on anyone else on dependency for getting goods and services from anyone else. I think the Ukraine scenario really highlighted for them how an integrated country globally could come as a weakness in their growth. They want to be a global 2030, and they want to be setting the global tech standards by 2035. So my point is, I take the landscape as is, not as I wish for. And so in that space, I believe that China has clear ambition to where they want to go, how they want to use this technology. Now, we live in a democracy. We are not China. We can never make our tech companies work with DoD if they don't want to. So it will be up to these companies to decide whether or not they want to share technologies with the Department of Defense. But I think the seriousness of this challenge and the seriousness of this moment will require us to create a new forms of public-private partnerships in which companies that have something at the cutting edge that can help address military problem sets, they should work with our Department of Defense. We are the good guys in this case. And I think that has changed over the years. I think Silicon Valley's attitude and discourse has changed over the years. If you look at back in 2016 and 17, when Google had a petition, among the employees of Google had the petition, and they decided not to work with the Department of Defense. I think Chinese actions against minorities and how they use surveillance techniques, I think the Russian actions in Ukraine has really shifted the mindset among the Silicon Valley leaders in viewing who is the good guy here. And I think you have seen now in the last couple of years, all the major tech companies really working with all the departments and agencies in advancing our national interests.
That was indeed a great question. So, before I get to the final question, I want to squeeze in a personal question also. I do work in the areas of AI and cybersecurity, and you rightly said that there are three essential components, hardware and software, where we are leading. And the third component, which is the most important one, is the data, because all the LLMs are based on large data sets. I sometimes worry that at the end of the critical window that you talked about, fast forward to 2030, would we have technologies to develop corrupted large data sets that will make the AI models or the learning models completely ineffective? Is that a possibility?
I mean, it's a good question, Dr. Mohapatra. I don't know how to answer that. I think there are two trends happening now. As you know, there is one that building these models is really expensive. First of all, because you require a lot of expensive hardware and you require a lot of data. So have we reached the maximum of the data that exists to build these large language models? That's the question I think we have to ask. Or what kind of new data could feed into this? And I think there's a camp out there that believes that their audio-visual data might help make these models better and better. And those audio-visual data can come either from, cars, moving vehicles, cameras, everything that surrounds us. So that's one camp, I think, in how you get to the new sets of data to train these models. I think another camp is that, we reached the maximum of using the data available that exists out there, and we have to build a new architecture around these models. But I think what we're seeing here is an explosion in large language models. I think the next 3 to 5 years, we will see other forms of AI that are going to emerge that have been work in progress for many, many years, as you know. But of course, the more data you have, the chances that some of the data could be corrupt are, high, as you know. I know that most of these companies have red teams inside, that they do a lot of evaluations with models. Are they prone to error? Absolutely. We see it every day, how these models can generate answers. Even today, with all the training that exists, they're generating answers that are not 100% true, or they are hallucinations, or, they mirror your own beliefs in the world. So I think these models will improve. I think new models will emerge. So it's an exciting era. I think to address people's concerns, somebody asked me the other day, when do you think we will move from being a risk-averse society around the AI to maybe a more of a accepting risk and a believer in these models? I said, once we start seeing the first instances when these models or the AI is coming out with cures on diseases that we have been struggled for many, many years, I think that might change sort of like the rhetoric around these models and AI, because, we probably stand at the time now when we have the ability to address some of the, issues that we were not able to address for many, many centuries, because we didn't have the data, we didn't have these models. And I think now if you start addressing the healthcare issues, if we can address sort of like the natural disaster, these models do the predicting of natural disasters, so saving people's lives. I think that's how we balance sort of like the risk with the opportunity going forward.
Wonderful. So with that, we would like to go to the final question. And this is, I think you already answered a part of it. So the question is, where do we go from here? And how do we continue to engage with others about how AI is changing the competitive landscape?
So I'll do a quick advertisement here, Dr. Mohapatra, but like my goal and our goal at SCSP is really bringing the public and private sector together, because I think that's how we continue to lead. That's how America continues to lead, because these two communities have so much to offer. And so for that, we're organizing the first AI Expo in Washington, D.C. Nobody has ever organized an AI Expo in Washington, D.C., where our goal is to bring small, medium, and large companies that are at the cutting edge of AI, quantum, biotech, with government agencies here. So they can meet, they can exchange cards, they can talk to each other, they can see the benefits of these technologies, and they can help our government move forward. As I said, these technologies can fundamentally change how we do healthcare, education, all the things that these transformative technologies bring in once in a generation. If we embrace this opportunity, we have a chance to build prosperity for the American people and our allies and partners, build a country for the future, and also stay ahead of China.
Thank you very much, Ylli. I cannot tell you how much insightful your comments and your thoughts were that you shared with us. This was a very interesting session, and thank you again very much. And let me hand it back over to our guest.
Thank you, Dr. Mohapatra, and I want to thank the University of South Florida for having me today. Thank you so much.